Today is April 12th, 2026, and first I want to welcome those joining us for the first time, having done yesterday's workshop. My topic this morning is thoughts, or more precisely, you could say thoughts about thoughts. For starters, it goes without saying that this is a topic that everyone already has a lot of experience with, no matter how long or how short you've been practicing. Thoughts make up much of what we take to be a private, inner world. We perceive thoughts to be our own, to be something that I create and I possess and am responsible for. And of course, in participating in the social world that we're in, we try to share our thoughts with others through words. But the words, a lot of times, end up being inadequate. There's a wonderful quote about words from the poet T.S. Eliot, whose art involved words. He said, "Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place." We actually share a lot more about what we're thinking through our body language rather than words, through facial expression, gesture, posture, eye contact, the tone of our voice. And also, what we don't say. Our silence speaks volumes. When you think of the sheer abundance of thoughts that we have on a daily basis, it's interesting to note we actually share very few of them with others. It's estimated that we have, on average, 6,000 or more thoughts per day. And the majority of them are involuntary. And so we, for good reason, we curate them and keep the vast majority to ourselves. Early on in my practice, I remember thinking to myself, where are all these thoughts coming from? Why won't they just go away? Why won't my mind settle once and for all? And what I didn't appreciate at that time was that the fact that I was noticing this, the fact that I was noticing the thoughts passing through my mind, was actually a sign that the practice is doing what it's designed to do. That was the practice working. It was making me more aware of the phenomena of the mind. And the thoughts that were the most annoying to me were the completely random ones. I recognized that I had certain habits of mind, for example, planning ahead, plotting out the future, along with goal seeking. And that I noticed those kinds of thoughts, that wasn't much of a surprise to me. Somehow those thoughts made sense because they revealed my habits. But then there were these totally random ones. Suddenly, a thought about a song I haven't heard in a long time. Suddenly, a thought about an embarrassing moment that happened a long, long time ago. Suddenly, a thought about blueberry muffins. Pogo sticks. Whatever happened to them? So random, these thoughts. Where do they come from? And why? Why am I thinking that right now? I've read that it's a really common experience to have random thoughts about our mortality, like driving in your car and seeing maybe an accident scene on the side of the road and thinking to yourself, what if that were me? What if I veered off and hit the guardrail? Or, imagining some kind of death scenario of ourselves or of other people in our life. It's pretty common to have those kinds of thoughts. And because we experience so many thoughts passing through the mind, and because they cover so much territory content-wise, we tend to see them as a big problem, as being unwelcome and intrusive, rather than just a product of what our brain is designed to do. And again, we tend to think of thoughts as my thoughts, and therefore my problem. But actually, they're not a problem at all. They're actually quite useful and necessary. We couldn't survive as a species without thoughts. They're what enable us to look both ways before we cross a street. We need to think and plan and anticipate. Keeps us out of harm's way. And also, another thing about thoughts is that they're a wonderful source of creativity. sometimes it's helpful to let the mind wander. And when it comes to the Dharma and to Zen teaching, thoughts and words are helpful to some degree in pointing us in the direction of reality, true reality. They're not reality itself, though. We can't make the mistake of thinking that the finger that's pointing at the moon is the moon. A menu isn't a substitute for the meal. A map isn't a substitute for actually walking the terrain. So the problem has more to do with our holding onto thoughts. Thoughts themselves are not a problem, but our holding onto them is. Just as it is with holding onto any belief or idea, no matter the content. The thought that thoughts are a problem is just that, a thought. Again, it's the clinging. That's the problem. Generally, there are two ways that we cling. One is by placing ourselves in opposition to thoughts. So, clinging to them in the form of aversion. And aversion is an attachment to a specific preference. Rejecting the present reality or the present thought and craving for it to be a different one, a different reality, a different situation, a different thought. And then the other form of clinging is the active pursuit of thoughts. So instead of rejecting them, we willfully allow the mind to become flooded with them when they're not really serving a purpose and when they're not relevant to the activity we're engaged in. And this happens not just when we're doing Zazen, but in activities like, say you're vacuuming the house, and as you're vacuuming, you're ruminating about a coworker. The problem is the clinging. Any type of clinging is going to remove us from the present moment. Making us unable and even unwilling to see clearly what is here right now. To see clearly the life that we're living. There's a funny, but also not so funny, Zen parable that shows the habitual grasping at thoughts, often as a reaction to our environment. So here's the parable. A man and his wife were traveling with their donkey. On the first day, both rode sitting on the donkey's back. In town, they heard people whispering, "What a mean couple, putting all that weight on the donkey." On the second day, the man rode on the donkey, and the wife walked beside them. And people whispered, "What a cruel man, forcing his wife to walk while he rides on the donkey." On the third day, the man walked and the wife rode the donkey. People said, "What a careless man, letting his wife ride alone on the donkey." And then on the fourth day, both walked beside the donkey. Again, people whispered, "What a stupid couple. Why walk if they could ride on the donkey?" And this is how most of us live our lives, going round and round, holding on to judgment after judgment. Whether it's about other people or oneself. It creates so much division, unnecessary division in our day-to-day lives. That's why we're so fortunate to have found this practice. It's a practice of letting go and letting things be. And it's so freeing. When we learn how to let thoughts be, to not engage with them. For those who do take up Zen practice, one of the more stickier thoughts that we tend to latch on to is the thought of enlightenment, the E word. The word itself is kind of problematic because as soon as you put something into word form, you make it into an object, a thing, a goal, a special place to get to that is far removed from who you are and where you are right now. And it reflects a certain attitude about practice that once I get Kensho, I'll be all set. Kensho, by the way, being an initial opening, an insight into one's nature, which we all share. But the attitude is, I'm going to get it, I'm going to grab it, and then I'm going to run. And it's an attitude that reflects self-interest. I'm doing this for me. And self-gain. And it also reflects grasping for a quick fix. And it's based on the assumption that we need to change something about ourselves or about our conditions. Again, that who we are, as we are, where we are, is somehow unsatisfactory. Fortunately, as our practice matures and ripens, we do start to open up, and we do come to see it in a different way. That we actually are doing it for the benefit of all beings, not just ourselves alone. That in doing it, the mind does become more settled and more aware, and therefore more responsive to others. More of service. And we may even start to notice that it's always available, it's always accessible. Just by making that shift in attention. Each time we notice that we've drifted off into thoughts. Just returning to this right here. There's a line in one of the chants that we do, the harmony of relative and absolute. When you do not see the way, you do not see it, even as you walk on it. But again, the thoughts themselves, they're not the problem. They're going to happen, whether we want them to or not. It's about where we direct our attention. So we need to learn how to work with thoughts by not allowing them to obstruct our view. To see right through them, see what's beyond them. To dive into this topic more, I want to look at the nature of thoughts from two lenses, science and Zen, because it turns out that science is catching up with what the Buddha taught some 2,500 years ago. So first, science. If you don't believe what the Buddha taught, maybe you'll believe science. So, neuroscience. A neuroscientist would say that thoughts are simply a product of electrochemical activity. Neurons fire up along a vast network. They're located throughout the body, and then they activate different regions of the brain. And it's not just the brain that's involved, although we tend to think that. It's the whole body. Everything that we take through our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. All of that gets processed moment by moment. Even the microbiome in our gut gets involved in this process. Trillions of bacteria are interacting with this network of neurons. Sending chemicals to the brain. And this is how the human body produces thoughts all on its own. Across a lifetime, the brain is constantly learning and adapting to what the body-mind is experiencing. And the majority of this processing that happens is below the threshold of our awareness. It's automatic, unconscious, a lot of it. You could even say it's accidental. And there's research that shows that even what we think is a deliberate thought, like when we make a deliberate decision, is often the mind rationalizing it after the fact. So the processes were already underway. And what this means from a scientific vantage point is that we cannot say that we are the author of our thoughts, even though we think of them that way. I recently listened to an interview with Michael Pollan. He's a journalist who has written on a number of subjects, including food, botany, and most recently, human consciousness. And although he doesn't identify as a Buddhist, he does, he says, meditate regularly. And the interview I listened to came out just last month on the heels of his latest book titled A World Appears, A Journey into Consciousness, which I now have on my reading list. And this particular interview was with Ezra Klein of the New York Times, with the heading, The More You Study Consciousness, the Weirder It Gets. It's a great title. So there are lots of definitions of consciousness, and as Pollan reports, very little is really understood about consciousness, because consciousness is basically awareness. And thoughts are part of the mental processing and experience of phenomena within our awareness. The awareness is the container of it, in other words. So thinking is not itself consciousness. Thoughts appear and disappear, come and go, but consciousness, the underlying consciousness, remains in the background. And in this interview, Michael Pollan describes a scientific study that he participated in. It was with a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt from the University of Las Vegas. And it's an experiment that has been going on for some 50 years now, aimed at what Hurlburt calls sampling inner experience. And here's how Michael Pollan describes it in the interview. So So again, he's describing this experiment that he participated in. The way he does it is he equips you with a beeper. You wear this thing in your ear. It emits a very sharp beep. You know exactly what it was and when it was. There's no reaching for your phone or any doubt about what you're dealing with. And then you're supposed to write down what you were thinking at that very moment. Then you collect a day's worth of beeps, which could be 5 or 6. The experiment has got various kinds of observer effect problems. You wonder, God, if the beeper went off now, what would I have to say? Oh, that would be really embarrassing. So there is this self-consciousness, but you forget about it over the course of the day. Suddenly you get a beep and you write it down. I was struck by how banal my beeps were. The one I described in the book is, I'm waiting in line at a bakery and I'm deciding whether I should buy a roll or use the heel of bread I have at home to make a sandwich for lunch. This is not profound stuff. Then he interrogates you about the beeps to try to make sense of it, to help you become a better student of what's going on in your own mind. Because it turns out very often we don't know what we're thinking. At least I didn't know what I was thinking. He would say, did you speak that? Or did you hear that spoken? I was like, I have no idea. He asked, was it in language or was it an image? And I said, well, there was sort of an image. It was very unspecific, kind of an emoji of a roll, not a real roll. And then Poland goes on to describe how what we call thoughts are often not fully formed. He says, the word thought implies a kind of roundedness to the thing that just doesn't exist. Many of our thoughts are these wisps of mentation. Wisps of mentation. Barely perceptible traces of mental activity. But even when they are fully formed, even when they feel like an incredible burden to us, there's nothing to them. There's also nothing to the person that's experiencing them. There's no self. No thinker. This can sound really disturbing because we've long grown accustomed to thinking of ourself as a fixed self. We do have a form. We occupy a body. There's something here. We have an identity. And we see ourselves as on a trajectory, as having a past, a present, and a future. And we assume that all of this comes together and makes a discrete, fixed self that is separate from all the other selves out there in the world. But actually, what we call a self, it's not static. It's pure process. Constantly changing, flowing, adapting, along with all the other phenomena that we experience. Pure energy and emotion, or motion. We're like atoms bouncing off of one another and merging together. Doesn't look like it from appearances, though. Another way to put it is that life is a verb. It's not a noun. And this is essentially what the Buddha taught. And it's in line with what a physicist or a neuroscientist would say. Pure energy in motion. To close, I want to read an excerpt from a book on the teachings of Tongan Harada Roshi. He was actually a close friend of our center's founder, Roshi Philip Kapleau. The book's titled Throw Yourself into the House of Buddha. And here's what Tongan Roshi says about this self that is no self, who has thoughts that are no thoughts. The multitude of forms that appear are not solid. There is just a constant dance of form and function. All phenomena arise from causes and conditions. Arising from causes and conditions, they have no self-nature. When conditions come together, a form comes into being. When conditions change, the thing disappears. Each dot, each speck is born of causes and brought to life in circumstances. Born of causes and conditions, the world is perpetually fresh and new. Certainly, there is no fixed permanent self, and this doesn't apply only to things that you think are outside of you. The very same thing applies to you, yourself. There is no self. Yes, there are thoughts, but they are all learned. When you were born, you didn't have any thoughts. Yes, there are feelings, but feelings never appear without an external stimulus. They always arise in relation to circumstances. There is not even my body. This body, if we were keeping track of it, would be 240 bags of rice, 450 bottles of milk, 275 carrots, 190 radishes, and so forth. Far from being an independent, separate self, everything is received, given. Trace your steps. How did you get here? Step by step, you are dependent on the great earth. We are always thinking, I made this. I did that. Look closely at just one case of I made this or I did that. And also, I thought that. And you can see that it's all being received, coming together. All things arise through causes and conditions. Nowhere is there any solid and abiding self. And so, likewise, nowhere is there any thought that holds us back, that limits us in any way, that prevents us from experiencing our life. And the way to do this, again, is to see thoughts for what they are. See right through them. Look beyond them. Don't mistake the accumulation and passing of clouds for the clear, bright sky that is just beyond them. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.